meet everybody. I know that there's a lot of changes going on in Oklahoma, specifically around METRC, so that's why we're here. I want to get right into it. As you may or may not have heard, we're part of iComply, which is the oldest cannabis compliance company out there. So we work on cannabis regulatory issues, policy, and affairs for cannabis businesses nationwide. It's actually part of the reason I'm on the road right now, and will be next week as well as next month, as we get down into a little bit of international work as well. But METRC is something we're pretty familiar with. I know it seems like something that's scary, but I wanted to make sure that we can at least come with you guys today on the presentation, let you know that it is manageable, it is workable. So you may have heard some things about METRC. Some of those things may be true, some of those things may not be true. So I want to sort of separate the facts from the myths when it relates to METRC and seed to sale tracking and inventory systems in general, since it is fairly new for you. I would say that I want to start off by clarifying what METRC is not first. And METRC is not a point of sale system, and it's not purely virtual. So you're going to be tracking METRC also using physical tags to the plants, to the inventory that you'll be tracking along the way. So I want to keep in mind that METRC is not just an online program, it's also going to be coupled with RFID, or radio frequency identification technology, in order to work, essentially, to make sure that you're doing it the right way. So we always have to keep an eye on our physical reality while we're going through METRC as well. It's also not a point of sale system, meaning that METRC is not going to track your individual patients. It's not going to track your individual sales. It's not going to necessarily track the difference between different product types. So it doesn't track the inputs for your cultivation. It doesn't track the inputs for your extractions or for your ingredients as you create an infused product. So from that perspective, just keep in mind that you're still going to be using other systems in addition to METRC. And the METRC isn't sort of a one-stop shop for everything that you do. METRC is also not inherently compliant, meaning that it will let you make mistakes. METRC doesn't tell you if you can transfer a certain license type within your own organization or outside of your organization, meaning that you're always going to have to be responsible for knowing whether or not you're in compliance with the rules and regulations as you use METRC. METRC's also not intuitively user-friendly. It's not meant for everyone in your organization to use. Just like having too many chefs in the kitchen, you can spoil a recipe when it comes to METRC. So when it comes to METRC, you're not going to have an easy time, one, training the people that you're going to be using METRC, and two, not everybody's going to use it because it's not intuitive and it's not user-friendly right up front. It's somewhat complicated. It requires paying close attention to detail. We'll talk a little bit more about the type of people you'll want to hire to run METRC. It's also not going to be the only tracking system you use. Like I said before, it's not a POS system. So at the retail end, you're probably still going to be using GreenBits, MJ Freeway, BioTrack, any other sort of point of sale system that tracks and can provide reports that METRC simply cannot. It's also not a safeguard against non-compliance. Like we talked about, it doesn't tell you if you did something wrong. It's not going to raise a red flag and say, hey, you're not allowed to do that. You're going to be able to do it. And I think as we learn about what METRC is, you'll understand that METRC is really more of a tool for the regulators. It's a required use by everyone. It is also going to be a risky liability if you don't know how to use it correctly. And because it is a tool for the regulators, they're going to be using it to analyze how you function. So if you're a grower and you're going to be using METRC and you harvest Blue Dream, and you do so every 8 weeks when you plant your clones that goes through veg and you're doing a crop out on harvest. Well, METRC's going to know over time, every 8 weeks, how much Blue Dream you normally harvest when you plant 50 of those plants or 100 of those plants. So over time, what METRC is really doing is taking the analytics and the data that you put in and then sort of creating a profile about how you operate. And in that profile, they're going to be able to determine if you're over or under your plant count, your weights, your harvest, your yields when it comes to extraction. And they're going to be able to identify through that algorithm who is out of compliance, who might be lying about where they got their inventory from, who might be maybe fudging the numbers about where that product went after they produced it. So the idea is that they're going to start to get a grasp or control around maybe some of the unscrupulous behavior we've seen in the industry. And the good operator is going to use metric well and not raise those red flags through the algorithms. And the bad operators, I think, are going to have inconsistencies, which will flag red through the algorithms. And then the regulators will be able to do more of a micro focus on those particular operators. So this tool is not really for you guys. It's really a tool for the regulators. And it's also daily priority. Because you have to have it correct and accurate every single day, that can be somewhat challenging. The regulation requires that every night you upload your metric data and that it's accurate every time you do so. So at the end of work day, every single day, some of your point of sale systems also do it live and in real time, so they don't wait till the end of the day. But either you're going to manually upload this, or there's going to be an API integration with metric, and the software you use will upload your metric information at the end of the day. Now, on cultivation side, sometimes it's easier just to use metric. Some people like to use and measure their inputs or see what their fertigation rates are. Same thing with extraction. So there's going to be some internal decision making that's got to happen pretty quickly on whether metric's going to be your only solution, or if it's going to be in addition to some of the other softwares you want to use or some of the other data you want to track. And even if we track that information, how do we use it, right? How does that come back to your organization? So metric is also going to be sort of a measure of your baseline inventory, because that's all the regulators care about is what you put in metric. So if your inventory and your point of sale system does not match your metric system, what are the systems we're doing internally that are going to cause those discrepancies? Because at the end of the day, everything's got to match back to metric. Could be user error, could be some sort of indication that maybe you had internal theft, could be that you miskeyed something or scanned in the wrong product. But how do we determine when those inventories are off, using metric as the baseline, how we control and reconcile our errors or our mistakes? And I want you guys to be reassured too, as I go through this presentation, that metric is in fact, it's manageable. It's not impossible. It's not something outside the scope of reach. Even for Oklahoma that may be new to inventory tracking, it's manageable as long as you have the right people, the right processes, and the right measures around metric to make sure that your people and processes are sound. So I want to get into sort of an overall view of how does metric work. You guys are here for the nitty-gritty details and information on how do you use metric and how does it work. So I want to start here with the cultivation arena. And we're always starting here with immature plants on the left. So your plants either come from seed or clone, always. One of the challenges you're going to have in Oklahoma is that at some point, the regulators don't expect you to put more seeds and clones into the system that don't come from another regulated metric licensee, meaning no more buying in from the black market. This sort of world of immaculate conception, as we like to call it, of where seeds just magically show up or clones magically show up from another state, is going to end with metric. And they're going to be able to tag where you get your clones and where you get your seeds. So depending on your state, you may get a sort of initial grace period that's going to let you put in all of those genetics. So before metric comes online, one of the best pieces of advice I could give you is get your genetics going, right? Get your seed banks, get your clones, because you may have that locked in and not make it very easy for you to get new genetics into the system after metric begins. So with your seeds and your clones, you're going to be planting those and tracking sort of the batch information, what we call a harvest batch. That harvest batch is uniform in strain, it's uniform in time you plant it, and when you expect to harvest it. Sort of like a family of plants. You have your family of Blue Dreams, you have your family of White Widow, and that family is going to grow up together. So as you start the clones, say 72 per tray, and you could chop down those 72 clones off of a mother plant, you're going to be able to indicate which RFID tag the mother plant was, or where it came from within your seed bank for metric on starting new seedlings. And then you're going to be tracking sort of the mortality rates along the way. How many of those clones died or not? And that mortality rate becomes one of those first sort of algorithmic pieces of information about your business, right? If you have a bunch of clones that go missing, did it mean that they died, that they rotted, or did it mean you sold them out the back door? And the regulators are going to flag and notice that sort of thing. So how long does it stay in clone and propagation as an immature plant? Once it reaches a certain height, in Colorado, for example, 8 inches, then it becomes a full-on plant. So that one tag that would be associated with just the immature planting batch, the clone tray, if you will, now becomes an individual plant tag that goes onto each plant that is going to be in the vegetative through flowering states. And these are what those RFID tags look like if you haven't seen them before. You're going to have a strain name that has to be manually written, or if you have a label maker, you can paste it right on the back of that. Because what you'll notice is this tag does not tell you if it's a blue dream or a white widow, right? It's just going to tell you that it is a plant, that it's a medical plant, that it belongs to your name, your license, with your license number in METRC. And that this number right here, this barcode, is going to be one of those things that you really get down pat as you go through METRC, especially identifying the last four of the ID. Because that METRC ID is always going to be the unique identifier to each plant, like a VIN number on a car or a social security number. It's never going to belong to another plant ever again. It's only going to belong to that plant forever. So one of the things too, as they're little plants, you can kind of plant them inside the actual soil. You notice here they have a little plant tag that comes with them, and that plant tag eventually becomes a zip tie that's tamper evident. But while they're small and they just reach that little height of 8 inches and become a plant out of their clone tray, maybe on your first up pot, you'll notice they get a tag that sort of sticks into the soil along the way. And then when they get big enough, you're going to be hanging that up in the vegetative state as it grows up. So we're going to be tracking how many of those plants died, how long have they been in veg before they go to a flowering phase and you switch the lights. And then throughout flowering, you're going to indicate, did you physically move them to another room in METRC? That information is going to be asked of you. Or was this something that happened virtually? So you can kind of get an idea that throughout the phases of METRC, you kind of have this immature plant phase, the vegging plant phase, and the flowering phase. And all of those have the same unique RFID tag to the same plant that is going to correlate virtually into your METRC system. What happens here at harvest is a little bit interesting because now we have these individual plant numbers, say 20 plants, that all of a sudden become 2 pounds, right? Or become 5 pounds or 10 pounds. But we're doing this conversion between an individual plant tag over to a total weight count for the entire harvest batch. So it's important to note is you're going to now be using a different type of tag. Instead of an individual plant tag, we're going to be having an RFID tag that is what we call a package tag. Now that package tag, the new serial number that comes on it, is now going to correlate with the 20 plants that went into it. So the idea is you're sort of umbrelling or moving up this seed to sale tracking. So what you're going to be taking at harvest is a weight count of those 20 blue dreams and what it was at wet weight for that new package. And then how long does that new package stay in dry and cure before you take a final net weight of dried weight, and then that dried weight goes into METRC as part of the harvest batch and into a new package tag that then gets sent over, or multiple package tags from that batch that get sent over for final sale or for extraction or for any other point in the supply chain. That makes sense? So what's interesting about package tags is we have a big tag that kind of stays with the package, and we have a bottom tag that can then be parceled out and become a smaller piece, but relates back to this main package tag. And just like the plant tags, you can write the strain on this, right? You can write other information on this. You can correlate other information like a barcode to your point of sale system so that it tracks it in both systems, because remember, METRC's not a point of sale system. And these package tags are used for transferring packages of marijuana and final goods in the chain of custody to other areas in your business. They're going to come in this kind of stack here, and you're going to have a unique identifier for each package. Usually you're doing this in sequential order, right? You're not going to take a package tag from the middle of this. You're going to use them first in, first out inventory management. And then what is important to note too is that you're taking that wet and that dry weight at that point of harvest, which is now going to indicate some really important information. Because one of the most vulnerable places you're going to lose product at a grow is going to happen while that product is drying and curing. So this is an opportunity before METRC comes down in February, that if you don't have a secure dry and cure area, a secure vault or storage area, to get on top of that. Because you definitely want to know who's coming in or out of there and what access they have. Because if all of a sudden 30% of your normal harvest of Blue Dream goes missing, you're not only going to have regulators coming through, but you'll want to identify that yourself before the regulators come through so that you have an idea of what's missing and why. And the more proactive you are about this, the less surprising it's going to be to have somebody internally that might think they can steal from you. And this is more common than you may think. We definitely had situations where people think they're entitled to your product. They can walk out of the grow with it. So you want to be careful with that and make sure that this is secure. And you have the time to do that now if you're being proactive about managing this before METRC comes down the line. Then you have to be accountable to regulators with these problems. So how does it work? We kind of just covered the cultivation side of this. What I want to point out here is the sort of the selling and the infused product side. So I'll start here with the infused product side first. Here's our package tag we just talked about. You'll notice it's just the top of the tag. The bottom of the tag can be associated with other things like those plant tags and kept on file as a record, for example, that indicates which package tag it went to. And you got your packaged up marijuana, 537 grams here, and it's got its tag on it. At all times in the process, guys, you have to make sure a tag is associated with the product. You can't have random flower sitting around not knowing where it's supposed to be or what it's supposed to go to. This includes waste weight, by the way. So if you're pruning and trimming plants during cultivation, they're going to expect you to also identify your waste logs and indicate where your waste came from to some degree and how much is pruned off or swept up, weighed out, and thrown away. Infused product manufacturing is going to be taking this packaged goods inventory, either on site if you own your own MIP, but it's important that certain things don't transfer to different places because extractions should never go to a grow, for example. We should be moving things down the supply chain in the right direction. So this packaged good inventory arrives at your infused products manufacturing facility. Now there's a lot of things we can do with marijuana once it's arrived in a flower form at an extraction or infused products manufacturing facility. And to that point, you're going to be repacking or identifying and assigning new METRC ID tags to every single time that flower changes in its fundamental form. So let's say we have 4 different trim batches that we're going to mix all together to make an extraction of oil. And that oil might turn into a butter, which might then turn into a brownie, right? So we take those 4 different packages, and each one of those package tags are now going to be associated with a new production batch of oil. And that's a new production batch tag. Now, the other thing that's important here at both harvest, once you package these products, and every time you assign a new package tag, you may have to repeat testing and required testing with the state. Those testing protocols are going to identify whether or not during this process of taking trim into oil, for example, was there any contamination? What's the new potency? Because if the potency of one trim bag is 20%, but another one's 30%, another one has CBD in it, then you might end up with a completely different result for potency as well in cannabinoids. So you have to retest this every time it comes through. And generally, those testing labs are in METRC as well to be able to identify throughout the production batch if there was any point of contamination, whose product liability that's going to be, especially in the event of a recall. All of this is designed to really protect the health and safety of the consumers by being able to identify what went wrong where, hopefully before it's a problem, right? Because you can't send out contaminated batches. You have to make sure that those results come back before you're allowed to sell the product or transfer it out. So once you have that production batch of oil, that might turn into another production batch of, say, butter, right? And that butter may then become another production batch of brownies, or that oil could go straight into brownies. The point being, you can have multiple production batches associated to a final goods product, like a capsule or a vape pen cartridge or a topical, that then is indicated throughout METRC where it came from eventually back to the original seed or clone that you planted. That's what we mean by seed to sale tracking. So in terms of making sure that you have the right inputs put on this, if you're looking to be GMP compliant, kind of play towards the future, a lot of your METRC is then going to integrate in with your HACCP controls for hazards, for good manufacturing practices or food safety. A lot of these things are going to be part of compliance as an overall umbrella that we help people with. And just understand that METRC is now going to be a little bit more accountable to what those standards should be, especially from just a purely inventory tracking standpoint. And you're going to have different weights that come out of all of this, different yields from your trim to your oil to your brownies. And then these brownies might end up back as a unit measurement, not a weight, right? So you may have 1 pound of oil or butter that went into an infused product process and end up with 5,000 gummies. And then those gummies become packs of 10 milligrams each, plus or minus certain variants on potency, all of that formulation, then you could end up with units of 10 packaging each at the very end. So I hope that kind of makes sense from just an overall standpoint of how we get from cultivation to manufacturing, because I do want to talk about dispensing as well. So once we have sort of product cultivated, it can be sent and transferred to METRC directly to the dispensing side of things, or it can come from an infused product manufacturing facility back over to a dispensary. And in some states, dispensaries send product to an infused product manufacturing facility to turn their product into essentially infused products or concentrates. And then they send that back to the dispensary as sort of a transfer of a contract product manufacturing. So at the dispensary level, I think it's important to note that you're going to be having a lot of SKUs to deal with. So the dispensary becomes challenging as you have 10 gummies in each pack. You have 42 of those in a case, and that case now has a new package tag indicating it has 42 individual packs of gummies inside of it that are then for sale. So as long as you keep those 42 gummies to a case and you sell it by the case, first in, first out, close out the case when it's done, then your inventory should be a little bit easier to manage. But if you're a dispensary selling like this, for example, everything on display, how do I know which individual product came from which metric tag if they all look the same? So if I order 2 cases or 3 cases from a vendor and I'm not following that first in, first out, the inventory management system, you could run into a lot of trouble, especially on tracking whether or not that batch is closed. If you're over or under that product, you scan the wrong one, if something happened to it, if somebody stole it, all of these things become immensely more difficult to do. And if you're required or you want to store your product at the end of the night, how do you do so if it's all hanging on the shelf? You pull everything back, hope that it's in, first out inventory management order, etc. So because every product has to be associated to an RFID tag at all times, if you're to display like this, then you're printing out barcodes that correlate back to the RFID tag, or writing the last 4 or printing the last 4 of that metric ID of which batch it came from to each individual product before you put it out on the shelf. If you do pre-packing at your dispensary or you don't do pre-packing and you're weighing stuff out, you're going to have some other key considerations to look at. So you really have to ask yourself as a dispensary, how are we managing our vault? How are we managing our backstock? And how are we managing our ordering of products coming in? Do we want to pre-pack flower or not? I always advocate for pre-packing flower in recreational markets, just because you have the volume of customers coming through so fast that it doesn't make a lot of sense to sit there and weigh out a scale, especially during COVID, where nobody should be sniffing product anyway and cross-contaminating each other, to be able to try to get that product out the door in a timely manner. But if you are pre-weighing, or if you're weighing out at the point of sale and you want to have a scale that does that, then that scale usually has to be certified for agricultural purposes and inspected by the Department of Commerce or Department of Agriculture in your state. So every single year you're getting a certificate on that scale indicating that it's been validated, that it's accurate to sell consumer goods by weight. Now, if you're pre-packing, you're also going to need a scale. But generally speaking, you're going to have a camera over every scale to make sure that the amount of product that you weighed out matches the amount of product that you placed into the container individually. So as we're displaying these products for sale, we got to consider whether or not we can associate them to the batch, whether or not they're easy to store at night. And we also have to think about samples. Again, don't recommend anybody sniffing bud right now and having sample jars out that are associated to RFID tags. What if you take one concentrate from the batch and put it up in the display case while you have the rest in backstock? Well, the problem is if I go as a regulator to look at that one sample on the shelf, it may have been there for 2 months, or it could have been there for 2 weeks. I don't know if it doesn't have its RFID tag associated to it. So these are just some of the common non-compliance we run into when it comes to inventory management dispensary, and just important little things to pay attention to and consider. I'd say the biggest and most challenging one is, how do you align your point of sale systems to METRC? Do they have automatic upload? And how are you reconciling your inventory on a nightly basis, every other week? based on these management protocols and how you're going to be running METRC and your inventory to make sure that you're accurate and that your inventory system is reporting accurately to METRC. And this can be really challenging just on silly little things. Say you have Wana gummies and one flavor is peach, one flavor is watermelon, but you put them in as Wana 2-to-1 gummies and you don't know which one is which and which package it came from. Or you get a bunch of samples from a vendor and they don't match up to any particular batch or in the point of sale system at all because you're just going to take the samples home. These are little tiny protocols that can slip up a METRC. And the issue with METRC is that once you slip up or you have a bad system, bad inventory management procedures, that slip up causes a snowball effect. And I'm trying to warn you guys right now, you do not want that, because what will happen is that in 2 or 3 months of that little tiny snowball effect adding up, now all of a sudden you've got a massive problem. And to untangle METRC, right, means you're generally hiring some expert to come through and reconcile all of your problems, all the little slip ups after they add up, and it costs you a lot more money. We've been on METRC projects and you know, cheaper than attorneys, but we're still not that affordable when you're talking about 100 hours and $250 an hour to untangle your METRC problems. The ounce of prevention here, folks, is worth pounds of cure, literally, when it comes to just managing your METRC and being proactive about it. And it's important to start that process now, not wait till January or February. So I know it's a lot. It's a little overwhelming, but there are some more details to pay attention to and to be aware of before we get METRC going. One of them I mentioned earlier was waste. This can happen at the grow pretty frequently, right? You have a dead clone, you have trimming that comes off of pruning and managing the plants, or let's say it happens at extraction because now you have the extracted material. Well, what are you going to do with all that? You know, burnt off ethanol extracted plant material. It's still marijuana, according to the definition of the state. Or at the dispensary, you have an expired product or a defective vape pen cartridge. Something like that happens. What do we do to throw away our product appropriately and track it in METRC by adjusting our waste procedures? We also have testing protocols to consider. So again, at the grow and manufacturing, this is huge because you're going to have contamination and potency testing. At the dispensary, you may have the requirement to show testing records on every product that you have in stock. Some of these labs do it and associate it in METRC. Some of them do not. So there are some early conversations to have and to look at your books and records for Oklahoma and make sure that you're going to be able to manage and maintain those records consistently over a long period of time. When it comes to just transferring product, there are other METRC details. If you're doing wholesale, if you're doing transfers between different facilities, you're going to have the magic manifest of METRC. That manifest is the only thing you can use legally to transport product and to show officers that you're legally transporting product. So that manifest has to be signed the correct way, has to be accurate every time it goes out. You're indicating who's driving, what their vehicle is, when it arrives, when it departs, what the route is that they'll be taking. So the idea is you don't have drivers going off route, right? Or getting pulled over 20 miles off the route they're supposed to be on for whatever reason. So METRC is supposed to be accountable for a lot of those things and is an important consideration to have when it comes to just transferring product between facilities or if you get delivery later on for patients, for example. So we talked about those manifests, and the other thing is adjustments. Sometimes things go wrong. Again, how do we fix those little snowflakes that add up to a snowball over time? So you may have to adjust your METRC, and there's a multitude of adjustment reason codes, some of which are automatic red flags, some of which you have to report to the state regulators if something happens, like theft, for example, in a lot of states. So you're going to be filing METRC tickets or reconciliations that are sort of outside the scope of normally doing business. But the idea is you're able to investigate every time one of your products goes missing. This is just good inventory management, and it'll help keep you out of trouble. So we talked about what we do from an industry perspective on METRC. But I want to talk about right now is how does METRC work really on the side of regulators? Because again, it's not a tool for you. A lot of this stuff doesn't help you cultivate better. It doesn't help you sell better. It doesn't help you infuse products and get higher yields. It's more sort of regulatory oversight just to make sure that you're doing things right according to the rules. And I think in Oklahoma, this is important because you've got a lot of people out there that aren't following the rules and aren't doing it right. They're probably not on this webinar, frankly put. They're probably ignoring METRC or resisting, right, this need to be compliant. So I try not to work with people that don't want to be compliant, because it takes something. It takes some heavy lifting, but it is manageable, especially if you have enough time to get ready for it and you're able to execute on it in time. So just keep in mind that through those algorithms, what you're really seeing is a transparent window here from all of your activities to the regulators themselves. And that's from a licensing perspective, from an inspection, audit, enforcement perspective. And it usually goes in that order. Inspection will be a one-off. They look at why your yields were off. Maybe they get an answer from you by phone. Good enough, makes sense, don't do it again. Could be, though, an investigation where they're like, this is a historic pattern and problem. And they're going to go out to those bad apples and look into them further, which could result in an audit where they want to look at all the inventory records, all the production batch records, all of the pesticide application records, and all the other things that they need in order to determine whether this is a good or bad operator and build a case file, right? Because really you're dealing with cops or ex-cops, and they operate in very similar ways, which is to build a case file with evidence and then enforce. And those enforcement actions mean you could lose your license, means you could be shut down and not making money, and also hefty fines and penalties. And in some cases, people have just never been allowed back into the industry again. So if you love your work, your industry, or your job, this stuff's important to pay attention to. Most people think compliance is METRC because it constitutes about 15 to 20% of your compliance every single day. In addition to all the other things that the rules have been changing with, and the rules are always going to change. So this is a way for them to analyze, collect data, be able to track the chain of custody, verify your case specifically as a licensee, monitor your inventory levels, which helps them monitor, future adjustments to market supply and demand, and really track the industry metrics overall. So the reality of METRC is that it is a tool for regulators. I think there's an incentive for them to discern between the good apples and the bad apples, and they're coming through the orchard. So the idea is, if you've got 10,000 licenses in Oklahoma and only a handful of, say, 100 regulators, do you think they want to regulate more businesses or fewer businesses? In the long run, if everybody got a license for $750, is that enough to pay for the enforcement actions? Is it enough to pay for all of the people that need to watch METRC on a full-time basis? Colorado, for example, has 1,800 operators, and we have about 30 dedicated people that just look at METRC every day, every single transaction among thousands of transactions. So I think there's a natural incentive, whether or not it's malicious outright, I think it's subconscious, that they want to consolidate and make the industry more manageable. And I think there's so much flack coming against the wild, wild west of Oklahoma from a regulator and police and law enforcement standpoint, especially from maybe your neighboring states like Texas, where that pressure is going to be there about bringing product back over state lines, etc., that they're going to want to look and see a consolidation. So remember that those algorithms raise red flags, which lead to inspections, which lead to investigations, which lead to audits, and eventually lead to enforcement. And that enforcement is the cost of noncompliance in a literal sense, but there's also just the cost of losing your business. We've seen little things in METRC really slip people up. For example, books and records audit come through, and they verified that 63 manifests did not have signatures on them from the receiving party, and that dispensary got a $1,000 fine for each missing signature, to the tune of $63,000 out of nowhere for just not having a piece of paper signed over and over and over again because it was a systemic problem of non-compliance. So those penalties can be pretty expensive. Now here's a window to what METRC looks like on the back end. I'll just point out a few features for you, because this is really where the rules and the rubber hits the road in terms of your daily management. You're going to have your actual business type up here and your license number in the top right corner. And you're going to notice a bunch of different tabs at the top that do different things. So to grow, you might be managing plants. At a MIP, you're going to be managing packages. Almost everybody manages packages and transfers, including dispensaries. And really only grows manage plants to that degree, because your dispensary is not propagating plants, neither is your infused products facility. You got some useful reports in here which can tell you like all of your active inventory, all of your closed packages, all of your waste that you've done, etc. And each plant here is going to be captured in terms of its phase of production in immature, vegetative, flowering, and within packages themselves, you have different tabs as well, including what's on hold and active, what's been harvested, etc. So you're going to notice each plant tag is uniquely serialized, including the strain name, AK47 in this case, where it's located in your facility, whether or not it's on hold for administrative purposes, when it was planted, and when that phase of production was last updated. And underneath it, you're going to notice all of the actions that have been taken and by which employee on which date reported in the METRC on when it was planted, when it was moved, when it was changed to vegetative growth, when a new plant tag or batch tag might have been attached to it, or when it went to flowering. So you could partition some plants out of veg if they're slow growing, make them their own plant batch or harvest batch, but usually you're not doing that. You're not going to waste resources on stunted plants. So everybody that's going through together is going to, sort of like a family, be raised together and graduate together or get harvested together. So you're going to have that complete event history. You're going to see where every location of plants are. You're going to have the ability to destroy plants here. And these are all going to sort of report back and red flag back to METRC to some degree. So it's really important to understand that when the rules hit the road here, you're going to have a daily accountability that has to be done by proficient and smart inventory administrators. I can't stress this enough. Your normal bud tender, even your store manager, might not be the best person for this job. Is your master grower really a production manager? These are some of the questions you should be asking yourself at this point. It can be learned, but if you don't have an intuition for really tracking and understanding where these things go, have an eye for detail, and really love to get into the nitty gritty of tracking things and making sure that physically it matches the reality you're putting down virtually, this may not be the right job. So it's important to consider that. The other thing that you're going to have for METRC is that your owner has to be the first administrator. So if you're the owner of the business, your butt is on the line here from day one, because you're the one that's then going to be responsible for training the other users that use METRC. So yeah, do you think most owners in this business are going to be METRC administrators? You could be, but that's not generally what happens 2, 3, 4 years down the line. So building the position out now, defining the roles and responsibilities is what I'm getting to, because each user that uses METRC is going to be accountable for their own actions, but it all falls back on the original administrator to train them right. So it's important that you start to define what are the roles or responsibilities in your organization. How are people going to be held accountable to some degree when it comes to their METRC administration and inventory management? And who does what, right, in your organization in general? So your retail store manager may not be your METRC administrator. All right, so what do we need to do to define that differently in the org chart? Who's responsible and accountable to who? This really boils down to a whole new job description for METRC, or maybe defining your jobs that you have currently as a bud tender, assistant manager, store manager, grower, trimmer, plant technician, whatever you want to call it, that those things get defined now, their job descriptions, which do lead to HR policies. You've got to have a policy that says you're not allowed to access anybody else's METRC on their account. I've seen this be very disastrous. We've had owners that have shared their METRC information with a trusted employee, manager. That manager gets disgruntled for whatever reason. I've seen them come through, delete all the METRC data on the owner's account, delete all the point of sale data, go delete all the DVR records and inventory logs from the DVR, and then call the regulators on an anonymous tip line and throw their owner under the bus. And when the regulators show up, the owner has no evidence to show them, no inventory to show them, and can't produce the video surveillance proving that the manager did it, not him. Do you imagine how bad that looks when it seems like the owner is purposefully messing up the business? So it's important that these things get defined, not just in HR policies as sort of upfront, along with all compliance, I would say, for fireable offenses, right? Don't sell weed out of the back. Don't sell to non-patients. Don't sell to kids, that sort of thing. Should be logical, but it's always important to put it down on HR policies. But really, these things turn into SOPs, standard operating procedures, and employee training manuals for those jobs that you define in that org chart by role and responsibility. So once you have it documented, you can have people sign off stating they've learned and understood this, then it's much easier to hold them accountable to it. And it's much easier to see where exactly these roles fall into place within your organization and who does what, why. And then one of the biggest challenges is your people never read these rules. So having them trained and teaching them the basic compliance expectations goes a long way to making sure those procedures and those employee training manuals you put in place have compliant people to follow them. And really what you're doing here is transforming the entire culture. I remember Colorado when we started 12 years ago, 11 years ago, that it was, very, very similar to where Oklahoma is now. We were doing dabs with our patients out the door. We were getting high in the back of the grow. I mean, it was the Wild West, and it took a whole shift of a culture from one where we could be happy stoners selling weed, for lack of a better term, to sort of professionalize ourselves and be legitimate, especially since we're on camera, and especially since we had to be held accountable to regulators for all of the moves we were making. You saw recently in California too, massive company out there that was selling illegal vape pens out of a warehouse. It was METRC that helped catch that because they just weren't reporting all this inventory that was being sold out there. So when the things didn't match up, they think they ended up with some hefty fines in the upwards of tens of millions of dollars. So I'm not sure that Oklahoma's going to be that strict, but certainly the possibility is there, and I think you're going to see that this is going to be used to really clean up the industry there. So it's important to realize that all of this stuff, when you document it, it exists. So when you have employees signed off on this, when you have written down SOPs, when you have compliance training and it's all documented, now you have what we start to call mitigating factors or risk mitigation. So you have now these shields you can build up to protect yourself against the regulators if they were to come in by literally having more documents about your internal efforts than they do. And that's just standard practice in every heavily regulated industry, whether it's oil and gas, big pharma, hospitals, etc. And that's what we at iComply strive to do, is build mitigation and protection of businesses so that there is no question about whether the inventory was accurate or who did what. We have some way to track that that's accountable. So looking at it from a smart perspective, how do we manage METRC best? I would definitely recommend right here, right now, that you guys write down these following items on your to-do list. But look at your new employees for METRC. Who are you going to be hiring? I've always found people that have managed jewelry inventory are really good. Bankers can be really good because they manage money. These are trustworthy people who know how to manage inventory and to make sure that it's going to be accurate every single time. That's the ideal person that can do that in a software system that can do METRC. You're going to want to make sure you update your HR policies and your handbooks for onboarding, offboarding new employees in those new positions, especially as they relate to METRC, especially to remove their access to METRC so that they don't go in and delete all of your stuff whenever you bring them on or off. Same thing with security codes. Same thing with your point of sale system. This is just good practice to put in place. So I always recommend you have HR checklists for onboarding, HR checklists for offboarding, and then it's done in a timely manner. You want to select the right administrator. So I would definitely consider other industries. You don't have a big talent pool in Oklahoma of experienced marijuana people that are experienced in METRC. You just don't. So you can pull them in from Colorado or pay them a hefty fee to move out there and work for you from other states that have METRC. Or you could look at other industries like jewelry, like any other really highly valuable commodity that has to be inventory managed against theft, diversion, etc. Casino folks, that sort of thing might be really good people to consider. And people that have software skills and can navigate a computer, understand that computer inventory tracking system has to match the real world. The other thing I would be looking at right now are your physical and virtual controls. Do you have controls to that vault? Is it a key access card system where you know who's coming in or out? Or do you hold on to the physical keys if you don't have an electronic system? But these things were never required when Oklahoma first started, just like they weren't in Colorado when we first started. We had to learn over time, and I'm trying to bring you the best practices, but you don't want to leave this inventory vulnerable to theft or leaving doors open for no reason when you don't have to, when you can easily get access designed by your roles, responsibilities, and your org chart. But this might require some redesign. It might require some modification. You might have to reinvest into your business if it's not been designed to do that. And then I would look at how do we hold these systems, METRC, point of sale systems, right? Growing systems, inventory management, your extraction, your formulation. How do you hold all your systems accountable? Because it's one thing to say it on paper, it's one thing to train people to it, but how do we hold them accountable over time to make sure that that train stays on the right track? And that looks like regular and third-party reconciliation of your inventory. So want to give you just some pro tips here to leave you with, and I'll try to open it up here for a few questions. Biggest thing right now, guys, is don't react to this when it's too late and wait for everybody else to see what they do. Because we know the date. It's February 21st, and it's coming. And the longer you wait, the more you wait for everybody else to react to it, the more you're just going to be reacting. And it's a competitive advantage to be proactive. So I would take compliance, and especially METRC, seriously. I would look at your administrators for METRC now. Get your owners up to speed on it. METRC has some courses online. I would develop your SOPs internally so you can train those administrators, or use those experts that you hire to create your SOPs and work with companies like ours to make sure that they're going to work. I would program and align software systems sooner than later. Know that your point of sale system, your growing management system, or your extraction or your infused product management system is going to integrate well with METRC. How do we update that to our SOPs and our training programs? And then I would practice until you've got it perfect. So you can start training your staff now on mock METRC, mock tags before it comes out, just to get them in the habit of doing the right thing the right way every single time and consistently. So I would definitely start practicing and perfecting that as well. Now, you don't have to do it in this order, but whatever works best for you, I'd certainly take a look at these pro tips and be proactive about this. I would look at my vendors and see how they're going to be doing things, because if you're trying to bring in product from a guy who's not got METRC down pat or has the wrong packaging and labeling, then you're just sharing the non-compliance, and that other person's mistakes will end up becoming yours. I would look at accountability structures. What does my manager do for accountability on METRC? Right? What does my grow operations manager do for accountability on METRC? And how do I transform my culture of one that resists compliance to one that embraces it, that is proactive about it, that holds each other accountable through training, through them understanding these important details, etc. Then I would look at how do I measure and monitor METRC over time so that I have regular ongoing accuracy reports, not just sort of once a month or once a quarter, but really more like once a week at minimum, to counting all the inventory. Maybe the stuff that's on the sales floor you count every day if you have good backstock control. And then I would adjust any and all of these things as necessary, because compliance isn't a magic checkbox just do once. It's a process of ongoing continued improvement. I want to provide you guys some resources as well and get this kind of wrapped up today. There's official METRC presentations and training out there that'll go through a lot of this similar information, including a YouTube channel that METRC has. You're welcome to click on. These are 2 to 4 minute videos, but they're really helpful. You can just search YouTube for METRC and be able to find this. And they'll walk you through like the general view of what's going on, but also how do you reject a manifest? How do you create an immature plant batch, right? These are training videos that you should absolutely as part of your training program on METRC 101 stuff. And again, there's always sort of the theory of what to do. Then there's very much the specifics and experience, which is hard to compensate for, but it's always a good starting point. The other things I'd look at are things like other states' presentations. You can Google online. Massachusetts, California have some pretty good ones that you can find METRC presentations and go through a little more of these details. And that'll help you just sort of anticipate what it looks like and be able to have it come down the pipe, but also help you define the METRC roles and begin the headhunting process for the right METRC administrators, especially if you have more than one facility, especially if you're managing METRC, you're responsible for it between more than one place. We're here as a resource as well, so we can definitely help you with guidance, with managing your METRC, with writing those SOPs and creating those employee training programs, helping you headhunt down people that you think might be good or not, designing interview questions, all of that sort of falling under the realm of this big transformation. Not to mention all the new genetics you need to get down or anything else that you need to bring in before METRC starts. I would look at our compliance packages as well. If you guys haven't been to our website yet, Blair here is very helpful to kind of help you out with this. But you can pick and choose the number of facilities you have, and then also pick and choose the types of business services that we can offer. So all of this is very customizable, and part of what we offer, say on a protector or defender package, is the ability to look at SOPs, train your staff, as well as do inventory reconciliations, and make sure that your processes and people are being held to measure and management and account over time. And that's really important to keep in that compliance train on the tracks. So I appreciate you guys letting me run a little bit late. I'm sorry that it took so long. I think we got a lot of questions popping in. I can hang out a little bit longer if y'all can. I'm happy to answer any other questions you might have. Here's my contact information. And I'm sure Blair can put in the chat as well her information. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out after the presentation. And if there are some specific Q&As, I see probably some stuff here in the chats. I'm always happy to answer any question you guys might have. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mark. So I was just looking at some of the chat. I think we answered most of it. Jennifer Keeley had asked if selected system metric is like other states or is a separate database called METRC. Well, METRC is the system that Mark just showed you all the information you can find online. That is the company and the system that the states, 14 states, I think it is now, are using. It is the same company system. It's just set up differently in different states with different regulators.
Yeah, the rules are different in each state, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Some states have distributors, some states do delivery. So that's the main thing that'll change between METRC. So that's what I was saying. You can't expect METRC to be programmed for Oklahoma compliance. You still got to know the rules. And so do the people using your METRC.
And then it looks like we have a question from Amber. What ERP or POS system works best with METRC for dispensaries? I think that's one of those ones, Mark, and unless you have a couple, I think you really need to meet with them depending on what your needs are and what you're looking to get out of the systems, right? So MJ Freeway, you were saying, is one that a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of point of sale companies out there, guys. Some are free and suck. Some cost an arm and a leg. So I always say that that's more of an individual business decision, depending on your budget, depending on the features and capabilities you want to have. Like I said, if you want to be GMP compliant and build Oklahoma to the future of cannabis in 5 years from now, right, or 10 years from now, that ERP system is going to be very different for your infused products manufacturing facility or your grow than MJ Freeway can offer, or a lot of other things can do. So the level of sophistication which comes with cost is going to be a big consideration, and then so is just whether or not you want to be able to track or report certain things, or whether or not you want real-time metric, right? If you do a lot of high volume, you may want that to hold your people accountable. So it's a lot of different considerations that are out there. I'm not here to promote any one POS company over another. I just say do your research. If you don't have a POS already and you're trying to run a store, to me that's just crazy. You should have had one already by now, even if it's some of the popular ones that have been out there for a long time. But yeah, I would say that's an individual business decision, and we can help discuss your goals and what you're looking for, and that'll maybe help narrow it
down. There's another question. Lee was asking more about METRC as far as who created it and if they're available for questions. METRC is a company separate from us.
So the company is called Franwell, and they're nice people, but they generally don't talk to you or help you until you pay them. So if you've got a licensing fee that comes down with METRC every year, and then those RFID tags for your plants cost about 25 cents a tag. So you want to keep that in mind as part of your budgets as you move forward, because they make you pay for their tags. But with that comes some level of support to their 1-800 number. But as soon as you call that 1-800 number, they're going to ask what's your license number and your METRC for your METRC. Then you guys just don't have it yet. So my guess is you'll start getting it assigned by mid to late January, about 30 days out before launch. And at that point, then you'll start to be able to access METRC, order tags right away, and then start to get help from METRC. But again, them helping you is just going to be with the METRC side of it, not necessarily operationally, and they sure as hell don't know Oklahoma rules and regulations.
Right. And as far as support, also, Lee, I'm assuming there's different levels of packages as with everything with software. So it's probably going to depend on what level you purchase to tell you what kind of support you're going to get from them, which is why
they have a pretty standard fee across the board because they're state required. So it's not like you pay for support afterwards. You just pay to use METRC because you're required to. You don't have a choice. You have to pay it.
All right, let's see. When is the earliest you can order tags just to get used to using Metric?
Depends on your state. And again, having tags is kind of pointless if you don't have a system to upload them into, because you're still going to have to go back through all your plants if you tag them all and put them in metric later. So it's kind of a cart before the horse question. It's a pain. It can be a pain in the butt process if you don't have a good SOP for inventory management, if you don't have somebody assigned to do it, and you don't have them trained and proficient on metric. Do you want to use barcode scanners? Do you want to use RFID scanners? Some of these are other questions that are just part of your design. But yeah, you can't order tags until metric says so. So keep paying attention to what the regulators say about their relationship with metric. And then, once you can order tags, great. But, you can't order tags without using metric first. So you order tags through metric itself. So it's sort of cart before the horse. So the soonest you can order tags is literally as soon as you can log in and they say you
can. Okay. So we have a question from Heidi. It says, Wana gummies is just the example I'm using for my question. The Oklahoma cultivator processor and dispensary licensee will track from seed to sale with metric. Does Wana get involved in the metric process?
Cultivator processor and dispensary licensee will track from seed to sale. So what you're referring to here is Wana. That is so of course two Wanas, right? There's Wana as I know it, used it in my example, that is Wana owned, Wana brand in Colorado. They're the operator, right? And they're the brand. Now Wana, Oklahoma, they have the brand of Wana, but it may not be run by Miss Nancy Whiteman and her team. So whoever has that license in Oklahoma is responsible for this. Whether or not the licensing agreement, which is different than the Oklahoma license, the licensing agreement with Wana says you can use their brand. I don't know if they provide you with SOPs outside of formulations or anything else around metric. I just don't know that answer. So it may or may not be part of your licensing deal if you work with Wana and you're the Wana Oklahoma person, right? You're doing Wana brand out of Oklahoma. Then they may provide you with that information or they may not. So they may expect you to operate their brand up to compliance, but maybe don't provide you the tools for it. So ultimately, it's not Wana's responsibility to run your metric compliance in Oklahoma. It's going to be the operator's responsibility that's there. If that is Wana because they invested themselves, then yeah, they'll do it. Yeah, no problem, Heidi. It can be a little confusing with licensing agreements, definitely. And I always try to tell brands like Wana that, like, hey, your brand is a double-edged sword. It's amazing until somebody messes it up, and then it looks like Wana no matter where you are. So it's important that there's compliance management over third parties that are operating with brands too.
Okay, we had one more. It looks like from Crystal.
Sure.
She wanted to know if you could go ahead and begin using the system, order it on the dispensary end to start getting used to it.
With metric, I'm not sure it's available yet. They just announced it maybe a couple weeks ago when we were talking to Arcilla about doing this. It was just announced not too long ago to get us to basically that it would be February 21st. So we said, all right, let's help people prepare for it. So I would say that if you're going to be doing mock sort of stuff, no, they won't give you a sandbox. I know that for a fact. So you can't really play around with it. Again, you have to pay for it first, then you'll get access. And when you get access and you have it, you don't necessarily want to go live with it. You're going to be building this thing somewhat slowly to get it accurate before it goes live, which is why they give you about that 30-day time frame. What I would recommend in the meantime is you get a point of sale system, start practicing in there and using barcodes, and use those barcodes, which will likely go along with your metric to help you get used to physically tracking the virtual reality of your inventory management. And then I'd be looking at how the heck you're doing things right now, right? That's the bigger point I'm trying to make in this conversation today. You really need to look at how you're managing things now without it and consider how you would like to once you have it, rather than sort of rather than just trying and see if it works or not. Start designing, put it on a whiteboard, map it out, and we're happy to help you with that. We do 90-minute consults that can really give you a lot of clarity and direction too. So just let Blair know.
Yeah, and Robin just wanted to follow that up with, how do we train to get ready for it? So a couple of things Mark was saying. First of all, just looking at what you have today, where you need to be, looking at the metric, the YouTube videos, or, it might be worth, some money to work with someone like iComply. We've been doing this for a while. We can, like Mark said, consult, give you a high level view, maybe a checklist, kind of walk you through what we recommend you should do that we've done with other clients to kind of get you ready for that. And then after that, if you need additional assistance, we'd be more than happy to help you. And just to follow up, I was on the METRC site. With regards to help desk and support, they have 3 different levels they offer based on state. It's not specific names or what they offer. Each state, they offer a couple of different levels. And it depends on, how many licenses you have, what industry, what part you're at. Are you a vertical operator? You just, dispensaries. And then they have a help desk that's available. And based on the level you have, that's how the support works. So, whether it's 24 phone or support ticket, but, they will handle that and work with you based on what you purchase.
Yeah, you can come visit. We can set up tours. We have an incubation program in Colorado. We also have the ability for outside workers. If you have a licensing deal with a Colorado operation, they're allowed to train people without badges from other states. So we do have some flexibility there. I think the challenge that you're going to have is you're looking at basically like a born chicken, and then going, how does a chick hatch? Right? You're kind of at the point where we need to warm the egg and make sure that it cracks through right. The beak that breathes right. We're just a different phase of evolution for Oklahoma. So that's, I think, what Blair is hearkening back to. Even a 90-minute consult, being able to whiteboard with you guys virtually and be able to say, all right, what point of sale system do you use? How do you manage this? We're going to get in there and start picking apart what is it you're doing now, and then help you guide that, right? We do that for, like for 420, make it easy and help you out. But the idea being that that it's going to be unique to every single operator, and depending on whether you're vertical or not, and who your people are. So when you said here, how do we get ready for it? Who's we, right? Well, we have to start there. And I don't even know who we is. Is that you as an owner? Is that you plus an administrator? Is that you and a manager? Right? Is that you expect 10 people on your team to know METRC? These are all pretty, broad strokes for a reason. But every single individual is going to have a little bit different purview. And if, part of your scope is I want to come to Colorado, check it out, I can definitely show you what a chicken looks like and bring you into some of our clients' facilities and do a tour, that sort of thing. I don't know if they want you necessarily shadowing all day long, but all of that is possible. We just have a conversation about it.
Okay. And there's some questions specifically about METRC and how it works. I recommend reaching out to METRC. You're going to need to work with them anyway. Now might be a good time. If you're not ready yet, and like Mark said, we can help in any way. We are more than welcome to have conversations. If after you talk to METRC, it seems a little confusing and daunting, like Mark said, the whole responsibility, the HR, the SOPs, that's what we're doing every day. So we really just wanted to say, hey, Oklahoma, we get it. We know what you're about to go through. We hope this was helpful. If we can help in any additional way, we just wanted to let you know we're here for you.
Yeah.
If there's anything, welcome.
Thanks for having us, Priscilla.
Yeah, thank you so much, Oklahoma. If you need to reach us, I am at Blair, BLAIR, at iComplyCannabis.com. Mark at iComplyCannabis.com. And I'm available. I'm in Colorado at 704-454-8913. And we really appreciate the opportunity to meet with you all. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Bye, everyone.
Have a great day.